So, Heather, we've talked about the Michael Cohen hearings. We haven't even gotten to the question of collusion yet, and sort of the criminal stuff. And we, frankly, haven't even mentioned what an amazing job some of these Democratic Congress people did, particularly, frankly, AOC. But before we get there, I was struck. It was always my contention in the run-up to the election that that Donald Trump did not want to win the presidency, that he didn't think he was going to win, that he didn't want to be the president, that he wanted to basically use this as a massive launching pad for maybe a media outlet, but also just broadly his brand. And here is Michael Cohen confirming that during his opening remarks.
Donald Trump is a man who ran for office to make his brand great, not to make our country great. He had no desire or intention to lead this nation, only to market himself and to build his wealth and power. Mr. Trump would often say this campaign was going to be the greatest infomercial in political history. He never expected to win the primary. He never expected to win the general election. The campaign, for him, was always a marketing opportunity.
Now, I'll tell you why I think this is super relevant, because I've always had trouble buying into the notion that Donald Trump was some type of Manchurian candidate or had even contemplated, I'm going to get into office and this is the way I'm going to leverage my, my business. But it certainly makes sense if Donald Trump thinks like he's doing this as a lark and it's a twofer. He can, he can go to Putin or to the Russians and say like, yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that for you, no problem. Just help me out with this several $100 million building that we are talking about, up until the end of the election, as Cohen reiterated during the testimony. I can make all these promises. I'm never going to have to fulfill them because I'm not going to get into office. I mean, I think that's basically, that to me makes the idea of, so-called collusion, which of course is not a crime. It's the underlying crime would be conspiracy to defraud the United States, and that we don't need to get into the technicalities of that at the moment. But it seems to me that context, that understanding of what Trump's perspective was towards this whole campaign, a lot of the pieces fall into place when you consider that.
Absolutely, and I'm not surprised by this at all. That Cohen said that. In fact, there's a quote from Trump from back in 2000 when he was considering running where he actually was going to run on the Reform Party ticket. And he said at the time, he goes, I think I will be the first politician in American history to make money running for president. I mean, he made it clear even back then that this was a marketing idea for him. It was a money-making concept. Now, you can interpret that in a lot of ways, but he said specifically running for president. So I think that kind of comports with what Cohen was saying and what you're saying here, that this was really an opportunity for him to raise his profile, the biggest infomercial in history, right? And so that does cast a different light on the collusion question, because what it says is that there are two possibilities here. I would suspect that the first part of it was this Moscow, the tower building. It's clear that was happening, that he was very interested in it. He had people over there, and they were being approached by others, too. Remember, it wasn't just the Seder-Cohen deal. There were other people coming and saying, hey, we'd like to do a deal, too, after Trump had announced. We'd like to do a deal, too. And Cohen even brushed them off and said, hey, we've already got something cooking up over here. So that was definitely a big part of what it was. And the Russians were seeing an opportunity there to sort of help with their chaos campaign, if you want to call it that, to try and mess with Hillary Clinton. But then the second part is that once he got the nomination and they started to sort of see that, well, on the one hand, it's unlikely this goofball is going to actually win, but he will, he's a Republican candidate. I mean, it's possible. And even if he doesn't, let's see what we can get out there about sanctions and about Ukraine and about, just sort of boosting Putin and doing all this stuff that Trump was doing, I can easily see that being a second phase of the collusion, none of which contemplates Trump actually having to deliver on the sanctions or anything else. And when if this is true and it was a surprise and he got in there, suddenly he's faced with a very, very serious problem. That's leverage. That is the leverage that Putin and the various Russians involved in this had over him, because they knew he'd been colluding throughout the campaign. They knew that he'd been, taking calls about WikiLeaks and, trying to do this deal which he had lied about and said, I have no business in Russia. They knew very well that he did. I mean, all that stuff they knew about him, and there he was, stuck in the situation, kind of flailing because he's completely incompetent, trying to deliver on some, on the sanctions and various other things, trying to listen to Putin and take his advice and do all this stuff. I mean, it kind of explains this bizarre sort of story as it's unfolded in a way that makes it much less necessary that he was a witting accomplice in trying to help the Russians,
More and more, this is like that movie with Zero Mostel, The Producers. But that being the case, Heather, we got to take a quick break. We'll be back in the next hour. If you'll join me, we got more to talk about.